Millionaire twins ate nothing, until their new black nanny did something. Widower dad married her. The air in the $3 million Blackwood mansion was cold and sterile, smelling of lemon polish and old money. Sunlight streamed through massive bay windows, illuminating dust motes dancing over an Italian marble floor. But the beauty of the home was shattered by the ugliness of the words echoing through it. "That person will not touch my grandchildren's food." Vivian Blackwood's voice was a shrill, piercing thing, a weapon she aimed directly at Camila, who had been in the house for less than 5 minutes. Vivian, a woman sculpted by wealth and entitlement, pointed a perfectly manicured, blood-red fingernail. "Just look at her, Thomas. Do you really think someone like that knows how to take care of children of our lineage?" Vivian's disdain was a physical force, dripping from every word. She looked Camila up and down, her eyes cataloging her dark skin, her simple but clean dress, her braided hair, and dismissing it all as unworthy. She was the queen of this mansion, and her power was absolute, her prejudice worn as proudly as the diamond necklace glittering at her throat. Camila stood motionless at the entrance to the vast kitchen, her posture a silent pillar of dignity. She clutched the strap of her worn leather purse, the single object that held the secrets of her true purpose there. Inside it, nestled between her resume and a spare nursing uniform, was a folded, faded photograph that could bring this entire family to its knees. At 28, a pediatric nurse who had graduated with top honors from Atlanta University, she had faced prejudice before, but never so raw, so unapologetically blatant. She held Vivian's gaze, her expression calm, her resolve hardening into steel. She had expected this. She was prepared for it. Thomas Blackwood, a man lost in the fog of grief since his wife's death 8 months ago, stood uncomfortably between his formidable mother-in-law and the new nanny. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his face etched with exhaustion. He was the man of the house, but his authority had long been surrendered to Vivian. He just wanted his children to be okay. He could hear their soft, incessant crying from upstairs, a sound that had become the tragic soundtrack of their lives. 3 previous nannies, all white and Vivian approved, had quit in frustration. He looked at Camila, a stranger who now stood at the center of this domestic storm, and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months, a desperate, fragile hope. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. The crowd, consisting only of Thomas, was a silent, unwilling audience to Vivian's tirade. He was trapped between his loyalty to his late wife's mother and the dawning realization that her prejudice was hurting his children more than helping them. He watched Vivian, her face contorted with disgust, and then looked at Camila, who absorbed the venom without flinching. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of defiance. "Mother, please," he began, his voice weak at first, then gaining a fraction of strength. "We've tried your way. It hasn't worked." Vivian spun on him. "Don't you dare use that tone with me, Thomas. These people have strange methods, exotic foods that could harm the children. What if she brings in diseases?" Her words were a cascade of baseless fears, designed to reinforce the invisible walls of their privileged world. Ignoring the venom, Camila demonstrated a small act of profound grace. She took a step forward, her movement fluid and confident, and addressed Thomas directly, her voice a calm oasis in Vivian's storm of hysteria. "What if I can really help your grandchildren?" The question was simple, direct, and powerful. It cut through the racism and focused on the only thing that mattered: the 2 suffering children upstairs. In that moment, she wasn't just a target. She was a professional offering a solution. It was a subtle foreshadowing of the immense strength she held in reserve. "Because so far, from what I can see," she continued, her gaze sweeping the pristine but joyless kitchen, "they're wasting away under the proper care you value so much." The boldness of her response stunned both Thomas and Vivian into silence. Vivian paled, outraged that this young woman would dare to challenge her authority. Thomas, however, felt a flicker of admiration. This was not the timid, easily intimidated girl Vivian had painted her as. Vivian, miscalculating completely, saw this defiance not as a sign of competence, but as proof of insolence. She sneered, "You have 3 days, and I will be watching your every move." She was certain Camilla would fail, that this experiment would prove her right. She saw a lowly domestic worker to be managed and controlled. She had no idea she was handing a challenge to a trauma specialist who had already diagnosed the family's deep-seated sickness from the front door. The 3-day challenge had begun. It was not just a battle for a job. It was a battle for the souls of 2 small children. Camilla's decisive action was not to storm the kitchen and force-feed the twins. Her first move was to ignore the kitchen entirely. She went upstairs and found 5-year-old Lily hiding under a staircase, clutching a dirty blanket, her small body trembling. James had locked himself in his room, where he rhythmically built block towers only to smash them down with a violent cry. While Vivian watched from the hallway, muttering about her expensive Persian rugs being soiled, Camilla knelt, bringing herself down to Lily's level. She didn't speak at first. She just sat there, a quiet, calming presence. "That's a beautiful blanket," she said softly. "It looks like it holds a lot of stories." Lily, who hadn't spoken a full sentence to the last 3 nannies, looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with curiosity. From the top of the stairs, Thomas, the supporting character, began to notice the shift. He saw the way Camilla moved, the patience in her posture. He saw her speaking softly to Lily, who, for the first time in months, had stopped crying and was listening intently. He heard his daughter whisper something about her late mother, Isabella, and a rainbow. It was a memory he himself had forgotten, and hearing it now felt like a punch to the gut. The antagonist, Vivian, only saw what her prejudice allowed her to see. "This is ridiculous," she hissed to Thomas. "She's brainwashing them with sentimental nonsense." She mocked Camilla's methods, convinced that structure, discipline, and food from their own social class were the only answers. The symbolic object, the tool at the center of this battle, was not a spoon or a plate. It was empathy. Camilla used it with the precision of a surgeon. She diagnosed the children's core trauma. James felt a survivor's guilt, believing his mother was lost and hungry, so he refused to eat. Lily felt abandoned. Camilla didn't just offer food. She offered understanding. She told them a secret, that she too had lost a parent as a child, and that mommies and daddies are never truly lost when they live in our hearts. Later that day, she didn't present a formal dinner. She brought bowls of colorful, cut-up fruit and dough into the playroom. She started making animal shapes. Soon, Lily and James were beside her, their small hands covered in flour, laughing as they made a banana dolphin and an apple turtle. And then, without any prompting, they began to eat. They ate their own creations, their faces lit up with a joy that had long been extinguished in that house. Vivian watched from the doorway, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. This wasn't supposed to happen. In her mind, this quiet, determined black woman was cheating, using some kind of trickery to win. She couldn't comprehend that the solution wasn't in a recipe, but in respect. Friday morning, exactly 1 week after her arrival, marked the end of the game. Camilla came down the grand staircase not in her simple nanny attire, but in a smart, professional outfit. She carried a leather briefcase. Her demeanor was calm, but there was an electric charge in the air around her, a sense of finality. Lily and James ran to hug her, their faces bright and healthy, a stark contrast to the pale, withdrawn children of a week ago. Vivian entered the kitchen, saw the briefcase, and sneered. "What's that? Are you finally quitting? I always said you wouldn't last." "Actually," Camilla said, her voice cutting through Vivian's venom with quiet authority, "I came to return something that belongs to this family." She opened the briefcase. Her first decisive move was to place a photograph on the marble countertop. It showed a frail, visibly ill Isabella in a hospital bed, holding hands with a smiling black woman in a nurse's uniform. Thomas looked at the photo and went pale. Vivian froze like a statue. "That's Grace Williams," Camilla stated, her voice steady. "Palliative care nurse. She took care of Isabella during the last 6 months of her life, when you told everyone she was just tired." "I don't understand," Thomas stammered, but his eyes showed he was beginning to. "Grace Williams is my older sister," Camilla revealed. The silence that followed was so absolute it seemed to suck the air from the room. "And she disappeared 3 days before Isabella died." The antagonist began to crack. "This is blackmail," Vivian shrieked, her voice trembling. "Thomas, call the police." "Blackmail?" Camilla gave a small, humorless laugh. "Let's talk about what real blackmail is." She reached into her briefcase again. This was the second, more devastating move. She laid out documents like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Here are the bank transfers you made to my sister. $50,000 for her silence." She slid another paper across the counter. "Here is the confidentiality agreement you forced her to sign." And then the final fatal blow. She held up a small digital audio recorder. The symbolic moment that would reverse all power. "And here," she said, her eyes locked on Vivian's, "is the phone conversation where you threatened to have Grace deported if she didn't disappear after Isabella's death." Thomas, the crowd, let out a choked sound, a gasp of horror. He stared at his mother-in-law, his face a canvas of disbelief. Camilla pressed play. Vivian's shrill, hate-filled voice filled the pristine kitchen. "Listen carefully, you stuck-up little black girl. Isabella is dead. You got your dirty money. Now get out of here before I make sure you're deported like the intruder you are." The recording ended. The silence returned, thick with shame and truth. Vivian's face had crumpled, her mask of superiority shattered, revealing the ugly, terrified woman beneath. Thomas leaned against the counter for support, his legs threatening to give out. The moral authority in the mansion had just shifted, decisively and forever. The quiet nanny now held all the power, and she held it with the undeniable weight of truth. The audio recording hung in the air, an invisible poison. Thomas, the story's primary crowd, stared at his mother-in-law, his expression of shock morphing into one of profound disgust. The woman who had positioned herself as the guardian of his children's legacy was, in fact, a cruel and prejudiced criminal. His silent disapproval was a verdict more damning than any judge's gavel. Vivian, realizing she was cornered, made one last, desperate attempt to recover. "She's an opportunist, Thomas. You can't believe this. She came here with a plan from the beginning." "Yes, I did," Camilla admitted without a flicker of hesitation, her honesty disarming Vivian's accusation. But her next words redefined her mission. "I came to find out what happened to my sister. But I also came because 2 innocent children were suffering, drowning in the toxic secrets you created." This was the moment of opportunity, offered not by an ally, but by the moral authority she had just seized. Thomas, finally finding his voice, turned to Camilla, his eyes red but clear. He was no longer asking his mother-in-law for guidance. He was asking the nanny. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of his own ignorance. "Money? Compensation for your sister?" This was Camilla's moral reveal. It was her chance to show she was not the opportunist Vivian claimed her to be. She responded humbly, her voice soft but firm, delivering the line that would define her character. "I want Grace to be able to come home," she replied simply. There was no talk of revenge, no demand for millions. "I want her to receive the recognition she deserves for caring for Isabella with such dedication. And I want Vivian to face the legal consequences of her threats and discrimination." Her demand was not for punishment, but for justice. It was for restoration, not retribution. Vivian exploded, her last vestiges of control gone. "You can't! I have lawyers. I have connections. And I have the truth," Camila replied calmly, tapping the audio recorder. "Recorded, documented, and witnessed. Plus, I have something your connections can't buy. A clear conscience for having fought for what's right." In that moment, the public reckoning was complete. Vivian's power, built on a foundation of money and social standing, had crumbled to dust against the unbreakable power of documented truth and moral courage. Thomas looked at the letters Camila had brought, letters his wife had written for their children's future birthdays, and began to cry silently, mourning not just his wife, but the months of truth he had been denied. The nanny had not only healed his children, she had liberated his entire family from a prison of lies. 6 months later, the world of the Blackwood family was transformed. The headline in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was stark. Socialite convicted of racial discrimination and threats, ordered to pay $2 million fine. Vivian Blackwood's reign was over. She had lost the lawsuit, her position on 5 major charity boards, and the respect of the elite community she cherished. She was forced to sell the $3 million mansion to pay the damages and now lived in a small apartment across town, a queen in exile. Camila's success was quieter, but infinitely more profound. She stood in the sunlit garden of a new home, smaller, cozier, and filled with laughter. On her finger was a simple, elegant engagement ring. Thomas had proposed a month earlier, in the kitchen, amidst a mess of burnt pancakes and the joyous squeals of the children. A moment of perfect, chaotic, real love. She was no longer just a nanny. She was about to become a wife and a mother. The public impact of her actions rippled outwards. Grace Williams, her name cleared and her courage celebrated, had returned home. Using the settlement money and an outpouring of community donations, she opened her new mission, the Grace Williams Clinic for Community Pediatric Care. It was a testament to her dream, a dream Vivian had almost destroyed. Grace became a local hero, a speaker on discrimination in healthcare, her story a powerful symbol of resilience. The supporting character callback validated the entire journey. At the clinic's inauguration, Thomas Blackwood was the first official donor, making a personal contribution of $100,000. "It's the least I can do," he said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion, "to make up for the mistakes of the past and support a future where no competent professional is judged by the color of their skin." He was no longer the passive, grieving man from the start of the story. He was an active agent of change, a partner, and a father who had found his strength. He and Camila, alongside a triumphant Grace, now stood together as a family forged not by bloodline, but by truth and love. Across town, Vivian Blackwood sat alone in her small, 2-bedroom apartment, the floral print sofa a pathetic substitute for the custom Italian furniture she once owned. The visual of her loss was stark. The grand mansion was gone. The social invitations had stopped. The phone was silent. All that remained was a gnawing emptiness. She watched the live broadcast of the clinic inauguration on her cell phone, the screen small and tinny. She saw the cheering crowd. She saw Thomas at the microphone, pledging money to honor the very woman she had tried to erase. She saw Grace, radiant and celebrated. She saw Camila standing beside Thomas, holding the hands of the grandchildren Vivian was no longer allowed to see. A single, whispered thought, heavy with the weight of irreversible loss, escaped her lips into the silent room. "It cost me everything." It wasn't the money she mourned most deeply in that moment. It was the family she had shattered through her own hubris. Her prejudice, which she had wielded as a weapon to protect her world, had ended up costing her that world entirely. The contrast was absolute. Camila's life was expanding, filled with love, purpose, and a new family. Grace's life was rebuilt, more impactful than ever before. Vivian's life had shrunk to the four walls of a lonely apartment. She had tried to silence one black woman, and, in doing so, had only paved the way for two extraordinary sisters to triumph, leaving her with nothing but the bitter ashes of her own hatred. Her downfall was quiet, private, and complete. In the end, this story teaches us a simple, universal truth. Prejudice is a prison that ultimately traps the person who holds the key. True strength is not found in privilege or power, but in courage and integrity. The best revenge is not to destroy those who wrong you. It is to build something so beautiful and impactful that their malice becomes nothing more than a footnote in your story of greatness. The final, symbolic image is not of Vivian's lonely apartment, but of the bustling Grace Williams Clinic. Inside, Grace, with her head held high, places a comforting hand on the shoulder of a worried young mother. Outside, Thomas, Camila, Lily, and James plant a small tree in the clinic's garden, a living symbol of their new, growing family. True greatness is built on a foundation of compassion, not contempt. Justice, in the end, always finds a way, especially when it has the help of courageous people willing to fight for what is right.